My name's Frank, or at least that's what I go by on the road. Been driving these American highways for 30 years now. First in an 18-wheeler, then, after the divorce, behind the wheel of a heavy-duty tow truck. There's a certain peace to it, you know? Just you, the road, and the endless stretch of horizon. Most folks, they stick to the interstates, the fast lanes. Not me. I prefer the forgotten routes. The old state highways, the service roads, the dusty, cracked veins of asphalt that used to be the lifeblood of this country. Especially Route 66. It ain't just a road, it's a living museum, a ribbon of history stretching through the heartland. And sometimes, if you listen close enough, it whispers. Most of my calls are pretty standard. Blown tires, engine trouble, folks who push their luck too far between towns. You see a lot of sadness on these roads, a lot of desperation, but you also see a lot of beauty. The way the sunset lights up the painted desert in Arizona, where the ghost towns in New Mexico stand in silent against a star-filled sky. It's a good life, a quiet life, the kind of life that lets a man think, or in my case, not think too hard about what he left behind. It was a Tuesday night, late September. I was on a stretch of old Route 66, just west of Winslow, Arizona. The kind of road where the biggest excitement is usually a tumbleweed. The call came in on the satellite phone. A tourist broke down, said his car just stopped dead in the middle of nowhere. No cell signal, barely any light pollution. Standard stuff. I figured it'd be a dead battery or an empty tank. I drove for another 40 minutes, the high beams cutting a tunnel through the desert darkness. The air was cool, dry, and carried the scent of sagebrush. Eventually, I saw it, a single pair of taillights glowing a faint, sickly red up ahead. I slowed my rig, flicking on my amber warning lights. As I got closer, something felt off. The car wasn't just stopped. It looked like it had sunk into the asphalt. The rear tires were half buried. The metal of the chassis seemed to be fused with the road itself, as if the ground had swallowed it part way. And there was no one around. No driver waiting, no sign of a struggle. Just this impossible wreck, slowly glowing with an internal faint blue light from somewhere deep within the engine block. I killed my engine, the sudden silence of the desert pressing in. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air here felt different, almost electric. I walked slowly towards the car, my beam cutting through the gloom. It was a late-model sedan, nothing special, but it was glowing. A soft, otherworldly blue pulse emanating from deep inside the mangled hood. And then I noticed the asphalt around it. It wasn't just fused, it was iridescent, shimmering with a strange, oily rainbow sheen, as if the road itself was melting. I reached out, cautiously, to touch the fender. My hand stopped inches away. The air around the car hummed with a subtle vibration, and I felt a faint, prickling heat. My old trucker driver's instincts, the ones that had kept me alive on these roads, screamed at me. Danger! Retreat! I took a step back, my flashlight beam sweeping around the immediate area. Still no sign of a driver. No footprints in the dust off the shoulder. It was as if the car had materialized out of thin air, an impossible sculpture of metal and asphalt glowing in the middle of nowhere. I considered calling dispatch, but what would I even say? Got a call for a tow, but the car's melting into the road and glowing blue. Over. They'd send a psych eval team before they sent another tow. I took out my phone to snap a photo, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The screen flared, briefly illuminating my own pale, shocked face. Just as I raised it, A blinding flash of pure white light erupted from the car, an almost silent explosion that threw me backward onto the gritty asphalt. My ears rang, my vision swam with afterimages. When my eyes finally cleared, the car was gone. Completely, absolutely gone. The asphalt where it had been was scorched, black and smoking, but the impossible fusion, the glow and blue, the iridescent sheen, all of it was gone. Only a faint, acrid smell of ozone hung in the air, and a small, smooth piece of black metallic rock, no bigger than my thumb, lay exactly where the engine had been. I picked it up. It was cold, unnaturally heavy, and pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible internal heat. I stood there for a long time, the tow truck's engine still off, the silence of the desert pressing in. The piece of black rock was my only witness. I wasn't just hauling broken down cars anymore. I was driving a road that seemed to be hiding something.
The drive back to the depot was a blur. My hands clenched the steering wheel, my eyes flicking from the road to the small, dark rock I had placed on the passenger seat. It sat there, an innocuous piece of debris, yet it hummed with a subtle, insistent energy. It was a fragment of an impossible event, a physical anchor to a reality that had briefly torn open and then stitched itself back together, leaving only scorch marks and a very confused tow truck driver. I tried to rationalize it. Desert hallucination? Exhaustion? A trick of the light? But the rock was real. The smell of ozone had been real, and the sheer, absolute goneness of that car, with no sign of wreckage or even a skid mark beyond the initial scorch, defied all logic. I used to think I knew these roads, every dip and curve, every long, lonely stretch. Now, the asphalt beneath my tires felt like a thin skin stretched over something vast and unknown. Days turned into weeks. I found myself changing my routes, deliberately choosing the most desolate, forgotten sections of Route 66, particularly in Arizona and New Mexico. I wasn't looking for calls anymore. I was looking for answers. The piece of black rock became my talisman. I kept it in a small pouch around my neck, its faint warmth a constant reminder of that impossible night. My rig, once just a tool for earning a living, became my mobile observatory. I bought a better shortwave radio, one with more sensitive tuning, and I spent hours in the cab listening to the static, hoping to hear something. Most nights, it was just the usual chatter. Truckers, late-night DJs from faraway stations, the occasional emergency broadcast. But then, on a particularly clear, cold night, about 3 weeks after the incident near Winslow, I heard it, a whisper, not a voice, but a modulation in the static, like a frequency trying to form a pattern. It was the same kind of subtle, clean pulse I'd heard or felt from the glowing car. It was faint, barely there, but it was there, and it was coming from a stretch of abandoned Route 66 near Amboy, California. My heart hammered. Amboy, another ghost town, long bypassed, a monument to a forgotten era. It was over 100 miles away, but I didn't hesitate. I spun the wheel, my heavy rig rumbling to life, and pointed it west. I arrived in the pre-dawn hours, the sky a deep, star-dusted velvet. Amboy was exactly as I remembered it. A few crumbling buildings, a defunct motel, and a gas station frozen in time. The radio signal intensified as I got closer, a low, rhythmic hum that was more felt than heard. I killed the engine in front of the old Amboy Cafe, a relic from the 50s with its faded neon sign. The signal was loudest here, vibrating through the metal of my truck. I stepped out, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive silence. The desert wind was cold, carrying the dust of decades. And then I saw it. It wasn't a wreck this time. It was a diner. Not the Amboy Cafe in front of me, but another one, sitting just off the shoulder of the road, bathed in a warm, inviting glow. Its neon sign, a vibrant red, spelled out Rosie's Diner. The windows showed hints of activity within, figures moving behind the steamed glass, the promise of warmth and coffee. It was perfectly intact, perfectly inviting, and perfectly, utterly impossible. Rosie's Diner had been torn down 50 years ago. I knew that for a fact. I stared at it, my mind struggling to reconcile what my eyes were seeing with what my memory knew. It pulsed with the same faint internal energy as the car, a low rhythmic hum that made the air around it shimmer faintly. It was an echo from another time, another place, bleeding into my reality. As the first sliver of dawn touched the eastern sky, painting the distant mountains in pale blues and purples, the diner began to fade. The neon sign flickered, its light dimming, the vibrant colors leaching out of the walls. The figures inside blurred, then dissolved. Within minutes, it was gone, leaving nothing but a faint, shimmering outline in the dust and a lingering scent of fried bacon and stale coffee. I walked to the spot where it had been. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no foundation. But lying on the cracked asphalt in the exact center of where the diner's front door should have been was another piece of that strange black rock. This one was larger, roughly triangular, and it pulsed with the same faint internal heat. I picked it up, my fingers tingling. The road was talking to me now, and it was telling me that the history books had it all wrong. Route 66 wasn't just a collection of old stories and forgotten dreams. It was a membrane, and something was pushing its way through.
The two black rocks now sat on my dashboard, each a silent, weighty testament to what I was experiencing. One was round, the other triangular, but both hummed with the same faint, unnatural warmth. They were my anchors to a reality that was rapidly unraveling around me. The Phantom Diner, Rosie's, was no longer a one-off event, it was a pattern. And patterns on Route 66 always meant something. I wasn't just driving these roads anymore, I was chasing them. Every roadside anomaly, every flicker in the static on my radio became a clue. My journal, once just a logbook of mileage and fuel stops, was now filled with meticulous notes, coordinates, times of strange occurrences, descriptions of shimmering air, odd smells, the precise cadence of the whispers I sometimes caught on the dead frequencies. I was becoming an accidental archivist of the impossible. My biggest fear wasn't that I was losing my mind. My biggest fear was that I wasn't. That everything I was seeing and hearing was real. And if it was real, then the implications were staggering. If these things could bleed through – cars, diners, what else? What if something bigger, something less benign decided to make its full appearance? One sweltering afternoon, I found myself on another long-abandoned stretch of Route 66 near Adrian, Texas. This was a legendary spot, the exact midpoint of the Mother Road, 1,139 miles to Chicago, 1,139 miles to Santa Monica. It was marked by a rusty old sign and nothing else for miles. But today, something was different. The air above the asphalt was shimmering, not with heat haze, but with something thicker, more viscous, like liquid glass, and the hum from my dashboard rocks was almost a thrum. I killed the engine and stepped out. The shimmering air was like a curtain, gently undulating, distorting the already blurry landscape beyond it. The hum was intense here, vibrating in my teeth. I pulled out my shortwave radio, tuning it slowly. The static was almost entirely gone, replaced by a deep, resonant tone like a massive tuning fork vibrating in the earth itself. And within that tone, I heard it again, the whispers. Not the rhythmic pulses from the first night, but fragments of what sounded like distant voices, muffled and distorted, speaking in a language I couldn't recognize. As I stood there, mesmerized, the shimmering air began to condense. It pulled itself together like a slow-motion ripple in a pond, forming a hazy, translucent wall across the highway. And then, from within that wall, something began to emerge. It wasn't a car, it wasn't a building, it was a crossroads, an entire intersection materializing out of thin air. It was old, impossibly old, not the asphalt and concrete of my world, but cobblestone and dirt. A wooden signpost stood at its center with unreadable symbols carved into its weathered arms. Two faint, ancient paths stretched off into a misty, undefined distance, leading to places that had no business existing on Route 66. I stood there, mouth agape, utterly dumbfounded. This wasn't just a brief echo anymore. This was a full-blown bleed-through. A section of another reality, another time, had somehow manifested itself in the very middle of my highway. The whispers on my radio intensified, and now I could almost make out individual words, though they were still garbled, alien. It sounded like an argument, a disagreement. The entire apparition pulsed, like a slow, deliberate breath. The air grew colder even in the Texas heat. A profound sense of disorientation washed over me, a feeling of being pulled in multiple directions at once. I could almost feel the weight of countless decisions, countless travelers, countless futures converging on this one impossible point. This wasn't just a physical place, it was a nexus, a doorway. Just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of fire, the crossroads began to recede. The cobblestones blurred, the signpost wavered, and the misty paths dissolved. It folded back into itself, retreating through the shimmering curtain until only the faint hum remained in the air, and the vast, empty expanse of Route 66 stretched before me as normal and unremarkable as it had always been. But I knew better. I walked to the exact spot where the signpost had been. This time, there wasn't the rock. There was nothing, just the cracked asphalt. But the air still tingled, and the whispers on my radio, though faint, were still there like the distant memory of a conversation. And I knew with chilling certainty that I hadn't just witnessed a roadside anomaly. I had found a junction, a place where the rules of the world bent, and something was using it.
The midpoint crossroads left me shaken. The rocks on my dashboard felt heavier now, charged with a new, terrifying significance. They weren't just artifacts, they were pieces of a puzzle, shards of a broken reality. My meticulous journal entries now reflected a growing desperation. I wasn't just observing anomalies, I was actively seeking them out, driven by an insatiable need to understand. The whispers on my shortwave radio, once a mere curiosity, were now my primary focus. I spent every spare moment with the headphones on, listening intently, trying to discern meaning from the modulated static. My old trucker friends, the few I still talked to, noticed the change. My eyes were always a little too wide, my attention a little too fractured. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Frank," they'd joke. If only they knew. I hadn't seen one ghost. I'd seen an entire ghost highway bleeding through the fabric of the world. The static whispers became more frequent, more insistent. They were always tied to specific, forgotten stretches of Route 66, places with a certain resonance, a feeling of deep history. Sometimes it was a brief, almost subliminal flicker in the static. Other times it was a sustained, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. I started drawing correlations, noting that the strongest signals often coincided with known historical hotspots on the old road, places where strange events were always rumored to occur, even in local folklore. One particular stretch of road deep in the New Mexico desert kept calling to me. It was notorious for inexplicable vehicle breakdowns and odd disappearances, a place truckers avoided. I had always dismissed them as tall tales, but now the whispers on my radio were the strongest there. It wasn't a distress call, it was a beckoning, an invitation. I arrived well after midnight, the moon a thin sliver in a sky dense with stars. The road here was barely more than a cracked, crumbling ribbon of asphalt swallowed by encroaching desert scrub. The air was cold, utterly still, and heavy with an ancient silence. My dashboard rocks vibrated fiercely, a continuous low thrum against the plastic. The shortwave radio, tuned to a dead frequency, was alive with the most intense static I had ever heard. Not random noise, but a powerful, structured hiss, like white noise amplified to an unbearable degree. I killed my engine. The sudden silence was deafening, except for the roar of the static from my radio. It was no longer a whisper, it was a shout. I grabbed my most powerful flashlight and stepped out. The air here was alive, humming with unseen energy. The static wasn't just coming from my radio, it was in the very air around me, a buzzing, tingling sensation on my skin. I walked slowly towards the center of the road, and there it was. Not a car, not a diner, but a gateway. Rising from the cracked asphalt, almost invisible against the dark sky, was a shimmering column of pure, concentrated static. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't fog, it was a vertical river of pure white noise, crackling and hissing, distorting the stars behind it. It hummed with a power that shook the ground beneath my feet. As I approached, I saw that the static wasn't uniform. Within its swirling mass, faint, fleeting images seemed to flicker. Not coherent pictures, but glimpses. A flash of an impossible cityscape. A fleeting glimpse of a creature with too many limbs. A fragment of a vast, star-filled void. It was like looking through a faulty television screen into another universe. Glimpses of impossible realities bleeding through. This wasn't just a junction, it was a tear, a rip in the fabric of existence. My hand, of its own accord, lifted. I wanted to touch it. I wanted to know what lay beyond that shimmering veil of static. My fingers trembled, inches from the invisible barrier. The sheer power emanating from it pushed against me, like a physical force. The whispers on my radio, now roaring in my headphones, became clearer, a cacophony of alien voices, overlapping and unintelligible, yet somehow conveying an urgent, desperate message. Just as my fingertips brushed the edge of the static column, a blinding flash of red light erupted from the heavens. Not lightning, something else. The column of static shuddered, then collapsed inward with a sound like tearing fabric, vanishing completely. The alien whispers on my radio died, replaced by the normal, comforting hiss of dead air. I stood there, gasping, my hand still outstretched to where the gateway had been. My ears rang. The faint, acrid smell of ozone was back, stronger than ever. The desert was quiet again, utterly still. My dashboard rocks were cold, silent. They had gone dead. Whatever had been trying to push through, whatever was using these roads as a conduit, had been interrupted. And whatever had interrupted it was also here. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was a target.
The static gate had vanished, but its impression lingered, a phantom burn on my retinas and a chill in my gut. My dashboard rocks were indeed cold and lifeless,
their internal hum extinguished. The red flash from the sky, it wasn't some random meteor. It was a surgical strike, precise and powerful. Someone or something was actively patrolling these ley lines of Route 66, shutting down these bleed-throughs. And now, they knew I was here. I wasn't just chasing the anomalies. I was now caught between two forces, the one trying to break through and the one trying to keep it contained. I didn't waste time. I jumped back into my rig, revved the engine, and put distance between myself and that crumbling stretch of road. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The silence of my dead rocks was unnerving. They had been my only tangible connection to this new reality, and now they were inert, just two pieces of strange black stone. For the next few days, I tried to disappear. I took odd jobs on side roads, avoided the main routes, and kept my eyes glued to my rearview mirror. Every anonymous sedan, every flash of light in the distance sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The casual paranoia of a long-haul driver, the one that makes you check your tires and listen for engine knocks, had morphed into a full-blown existential dread. I knew what I had seen, and I knew someone didn't want anyone else to see it. It was in a small, forgotten diner off a feeder road in Oklahoma when I finally got a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was nursing a lukewarm coffee, trying to blend in, when two men walked in. They were dressed in cheap, ill-fitting dark suits, the kind of attire that looks perfectly out of place in a dusty roadside eatery. They were clean-shaven, almost unnaturally so, and they moved with a silent, almost synchronized precision. They didn't order food. They didn't even look at the menu. Their eyes, dark and flat, scanned the room, bypassing the locals, settling directly on me. My gut clenched. These weren't locals. These weren't cops. They were something else. They were the ones who sent the red light, the wardens of the static gate. I dropped a few dollars on the counter, stood up slowly, and made my way to the exit, trying to appear casual. As I passed them, one of them, the taller one, spoke. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection, like a recording. "Nice rig, Frank. Keeping it on the road is important work." He didn't ask a question. He made a statement that told me everything. They knew my name, they knew my truck, they knew where I'd been. I didn't reply. I just kept walking, my pace steady, until I was outside. I didn't run. That would just confirm their suspicions. I got into my truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot, trying not to look at the dark, unmarked sedan parked casually a few spaces down. It was sleek, modern, with tinted windows. It hadn't been there when I pulled in. I drove for an hour, pushing my rig hard, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the endless road. I started to think I had outrun them, that maybe they just wanted to send a message. Then, as I came over a long, empty rise, I saw it. Parked on the shoulder ahead of me was another identical black sedan. This one was facing me, its headlights off. As I approached, its high beams flashed once, a silent, unmistakable signal. They were ahead of me, they were behind me, they were everywhere. I braked hard, the tires squealing on the old asphalt. My heart was pounding. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were actively intercepting me. There was no escape. I was trapped on a forgotten stretch of Route 66, surrounded by unknown forces, caught between a hidden war for reality and the silent men in black suits who enforced its rules. I knew, with a cold certainty, that my accidental discovery had now become a very deliberate, very personal problem. And I also knew that turning back, where surrendering was no longer an option. Not with that loneliness from the monolith still echoing in my memory. Not with those black rocks, silent but heavy, in my pocket. I had to understand. I had to find out what they were guarding.
The black sedan ahead of me, silent and menacing, might as well have been a brick wall.
There was no way around it on this narrow, crumbling stretch of Route 66. Behind me, the other sedan would be closing in. I was trapped. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but years on the road, years of dealing with blown tires at 3 a.m. and blinding blizzards had taught me one thing: never stop moving, even if it's sideways. I jammed my foot down on the accelerator, hoping a sudden burst of speed might intimidate them, make a move. The big rig roared, its old diesel engine groaning in protest. The sedan ahead didn't budge. Its high beams flashed again, a more insistent, almost aggressive signal this time. They weren't moving. They wanted me to stop. But stopping meant answers I didn't want to give. Stopping meant the end of my accidental investigation. My eyes darted to the right. Just off the shoulder, barely visible through the dust and scrub, was an old, unpaved road. Not even a proper dirt track, just two faint ruts disappearing into the vast, empty desert. It was marked only by a rusted, bent sign that had long ago lost its lettering. It was a route to nowhere, which, at this moment, sounded like the best possible destination. Without a second thought, I spun the wheel hard. The heavy tow truck lurched violently, tires screaming in protest as I slammed it off the asphalt and onto the dirt track. A huge cloud of red dust erupted behind me, momentarily obscuring the sedans. It was a reckless move, one that could easily flip my rig, but I had no other choice. The desert track was a brutal ride. The truck bounced and slammed over unseen ruts and rocks, every jolt rattling my teeth. My cargo, thankfully empty, groaned and swayed. I held the wheel in a death grip, my eyes scanning the track, praying it didn't just end in a ravine. The dust cloud I'd kicked up was my only shield, a swirling red curtain between me and my pursuers. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Through the settling dust, I could see them. The black sedans were off the asphalt now, following me onto the impossible terrain. They moved with an unnerving grace, their suspensions seemingly unfazed by the brutal landscape. They weren't just fast, they were adaptable, and they were relentless. I pushed the rig harder, ignoring the warning lights flashing on my dashboard. The track, barely visible, wound through a labyrinth of low mesas and ancient rock formations. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in hues of fiery orange and deep, bruised purple. The light was fading fast, and with it, my chances. Just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, I saw something ahead. Not a building, not a road. It was a structure, impossibly old, half buried in the sand. It looked like the skeletal remains of some colossal, petrified creature, its ribs of dark, smooth stone jutting out from the earth. And as I got closer, I realized it wasn't natural. It was artificial, massive, dark, and riddled with geometric patterns that were eerily familiar. The hum returned, not from my dashboard rocks, which were still inert, but from the very ground beneath my tires. It vibrated through the truck, a deep, resonant thrum that matched the patterns on the ancient structure. The whispers on my dead radio flared back to life, a cacophony of alien voices, more urgent and clearer than ever before. I knew this structure, not from any memory of my own, but from the fragments of the vision I had received when I touched the monolith. It was a power conduit, a ley line nexus, just like the static gate, but ancient, massive, and seemingly dormant. The black sedans were right on my tail, their engines roaring now, closing in fast. I had a choice: stop, surrender, and let them take me, or drive straight into the heart of this impossible, ancient thing. My hand instinctively went to the small pouch around my neck, feeling the cold, silent black rocks. A sudden, defiant spark ignited within me. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to be silent. I jammed my foot down on the accelerator, aiming my rig directly at a massive arching opening in the side of the ancient stone structure, barely wide enough for my truck to fit. The alien whispers on the radio reached a fever peak, sounding like a chorus of screams and warnings, but I ignored them. I drove.
The ancient archway loomed, a maw of dark stone against the fading desert light. Behind me, the black sedans were practically on my bumper, their headlights glaring, their engines screaming.
I didn't know what lay inside that impossible structure, but I knew what lay behind me: capture, silence, and oblivion. The choice was clear. I braced myself, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, and slammed the heavy rig through the arch. The metal of the truck scraped and groaned against the rough stone of the tunnel entrance, showering sparks. The inside was a cavern, vast and dark, lit only by the faint glow emanating from the geometric patterns etched into the walls, the same blue-green light as the monolith and the rocks on my dash. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and ancient. The moment my truck was fully inside, the tunnel pulsed with energy. The hum rose to a deafening roar, vibrating through my entire body. The whispers on my shortwave radio, now screaming in my ears through my headphones, resolved into something more coherent, though still alien. It wasn't a language I understood with my ears, but with some deeper primal part of my brain. It was a deluge of information: technical schematics, navigational charts for interstellar travel, historical records of civilizations I couldn't comprehend. It was the mind of the conduit itself, awake and aware, flooding my consciousness. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the black sedans hesitate at the entrance, their drivers apparently unwilling or unable to follow me into the pulsating heart of the structure. For a brief, terrifying second, I thought I was safe. Then, a blinding flash of red light erupted from the entrance, followed by a concussive blast that rocked my truck. The wardens were firing, not at me, not directly, but at the tunnel itself, trying to collapse it, to seal me inside, or perhaps to sever the connection I had just made. The ancient structure groaned, massive stone blocks cracking and showering dust. I saw patterns on the walls flicker wildly as the power surged. I knew, instinctively, that this place wasn't just a physical structure. It was a vast, technological engine, and I had just turned it on. I drove deeper, the tunnel twisting and turning. The blue-green light intensified, illuminating colossal chambers filled with impossible machinery, towering columns of polished black stone, intricate networks of glowing conduits, and vast open spaces that seemed to stretch into infinity. This wasn't a road to nowhere. It was a highway to somewhere else entirely. The whispers in my mind, the torrent of information from the conduit, resolved into a clearer purpose. This structure, this entire network woven beneath the forgotten roads of America, wasn't just a communication system, it was a transportation system. A network of ley lines, as I had suspected, but designed to bridge not just distance, but dimensions. The static gates, the phantom diners, the impossibly fused car, they were all just malfunctions, glitches as this ancient system powered up, bleeding through to my reality. And the black rocks in my pocket, the fragments of the gateway, the fragments of the conduit, they weren't just inert objects. They were keys, power sources, resonance filters. By carrying them, by touching them, I had become an antenna, a conductor. I reached the heart of the structure, a colossal, circular chamber, miles wide, stretching upwards into an unknown void. In its center, rising from a pool of shimmering blue-green light, was a structure that defied description. It was a vortex, a shimmering tear in the fabric of space, pulsing with raw, uncontrolled energy. This was the true static gate, the core of the conduit. My truck skidded to a halt at the edge of the chamber. The whispers in my mind coalesced into a single, overwhelming directive: engage the nexus, stabilize the path. I didn't understand the words, but the intention was clear. I was meant to interact with it, to open it, to finish what it had started. Behind me, the ancient tunnel rumbled. More blasts. The wardens were breaking through. I had moments. I looked down at the black rocks in my hand, now pulsating faintly with the same blue-green light as the vortex. They were alive again. They were calling to me. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that by doing this, I would be crossing a line from which there was no return. But the alternative, capture, silence, the defeat of this ancient and lonely system, was no longer acceptable. The road had called to me, and I had answered. Now, it was time to drive through.
The decision was made. The wardens were breaking through the tunnel behind me, their blasts shaking the very foundations of this ancient conduit. My two black rocks, humming and pulsing in my hand, felt like living things, urging me forward. The colossal vortex in the center of the chamber shimmered, a liquid mirror, reflecting impossible stars and nebulas I had only seen in fragments of visions. This was the true static gate, and it was calling to me. I gripped the wheel, took a deep breath, and aimed my tow truck directly at the heart of the swirling blue-green energy. There was no going back. This wasn't just a physical act. It was a surrender to the unknown, a leap of faith into a reality beyond human comprehension. The whispers in my mind, a symphony of alien voices, reached a fever pitch, their urgent messages flowing directly into my consciousness. Stabilize, balance, connect. I pressed the accelerator. The old diesel engine roared its final protest, pushing the heavy rig forward. The truck gained speed, rocketing across the ancient, polished floor of the chamber towards the shimmering, impossibly vast vortex. The air around the truck crackled with raw energy, making my hair stand on end. The dashboard rocks, held tight in my hand, flared with blinding blue-green light, their energy merging with the vortex. The moment the front bumper touched the shimmering surface of the vortex, everything changed. It wasn't a crash, it was a dissolution. The metal of the truck, the glass of the windshield, the very air around me, it all turned to pure light, pure energy. My body dissolved, atom by atom, into a cascade of vibrant, blinding color. There was no pain, only an overwhelming sense of expansion, of being stretched across infinity. I was no longer Frank, the tow truck driver. I was pure consciousness, a spark of awareness traversing a river of impossible light. I saw it all, flashes of other dimensions, other realities, worlds of crystalline cities under triple suns, vast, empty voids where stars were born and died in silent, unimaginable bursts. I saw the network, the true Route 66, not as roads of asphalt, but as strands of pure energy, weaving through the fabric of existence, connecting countless points, countless worlds. And I saw the purpose of the wardens, not to guard a prisoner, but to contain a breach, to prevent this vast ancient network from tearing itself apart. Then came the memories of the conduit, flowing through me, overwhelming my own small human consciousness. It was a being, an entity that lived within this technology, an ancient consciousness that had built this vast transportation system. It was old, broken, and desperately trying to repair itself, to find a way to complete its journey. The anomalies on Route 66 were its failed attempts to reach across, to signal for help. By carrying the keys and engaging the nexus, I had somehow become a necessary component, a living circuit in its vast, broken system. The disillusion ended as abruptly as it began. I felt a sudden, jarring recoalescence. My body snapped back into existence, the metallic tang of ozone filling my mouth. I was still in my truck, still gripping the steering wheel, but the world outside the windshield was utterly transformed. The colossal chamber, the ancient stone walls, the shimmering vortex, all were gone. I was back on a road, a black, perfectly smooth road that stretched into an impossible distance, under a sky that was a deep iridescent purple, swirling with luminous green clouds. The ground on either side of the road was not desert. It was a landscape of towering crystalline structures that glowed with a soft inner light. Strange geometric flora pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of something metallic and sweet. I was on Route 66, but it was not my Route 66. This was the conduit fully engaged. This was the network alive. And I had just driven through. My dashboard rocks were inert again, but the hum resonated deep within my chest. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. I looked at my hands, at the familiar calluses, and then out at the impossible world stretched before me. I had crossed over. I had become part of the conduit. The old Route 66 was gone. My old life was gone. And I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that the journey had just begun.
The world outside my windshield was a symphony of impossible beauty. The purple sky, the green clouds, the bioluminescent crystalline forests. It was a landscape painted by a mind infinitely grander than my own. I was driving on Route 66, but it was a Route 66 remade, reimagined, rewoven into the fabric of another dimension. The hum of the conduit was a gentle vibration now, a constant presence that felt less like a machine and more like a living pulse, a vast, complex organism. My initial terror had been replaced by a profound, almost childlike awe. Every mile was a revelation. The air was breathable, though it tasted faintly metallic. The temperature was mild, there was no sun, but the entire landscape was bathed in the soft internal glow of the crystalline flora and the structures that towered into the purple sky. These structures weren't just buildings, they were vast, organic-looking conduits, humming with energy, connecting the glowing points on the horizon. This was the network, the true form of the ley lines. I drove for what felt like hours, perhaps days, time having lost all meaning in this timeless expanse. There were no other vehicles, no other living beings, just my lone tow truck rumbling down a cosmic highway. The silence was profound, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the silent roar of vast energies, the quiet conversation of an ancient technological consciousness that had integrated itself with the very world. As I drove, the conduit's consciousness, the overwhelming torrent of information I had experienced earlier, slowly began to coalesce into a more comprehensible narrative within my mind. It was a history, a purpose. This network, this Route 66, was an ancient civilization's greatest achievement, a system to explore and connect galaxies, a means to travel through the deep fabric of space-time. But something had gone wrong. A catastrophic event, a destabilization that had fractured the network, leaving vast sections of it dormant, broken, bleeding through to other realities, my reality. The creature in the Mojave Desert, the source of the distress signal, was not a prisoner of the wardens. It was a fragment of the conduit itself, a core component, marooned and damaged, trying desperately to repair itself. And I, with my accidental keys and my human consciousness, had somehow activated a dormant segment of the network. I wasn't just driving, I was helping to reconnect the pieces. My thoughts drifted back to the wardens, the men in black sedans, the red light from the sky. They weren't malevolent jailers. They were guardians, protectors. Their job was to contain the chaotic bleed-throughs, to prevent the broken network from causing irreparable damage to fragile realities like my own. They were maintaining order, preventing a cosmic catastrophe. My actions, by reactivating this section of the conduit, had likely undone centuries of their silent, arduous work. I had been so focused on the call for help, I hadn't considered the cost of answering it. The road ahead began to change. The crystalline forests thinned, replaced by vast, shimmering plains that stretched to a glowing horizon. And in the distance, a colossal light began to grow, a beacon of pure, brilliant white gold. It wasn't a star, it was a structure so immense it dwarfed everything else in this alien landscape. It was the heart of the network, the central nexus. As I got closer, the hum intensified, resonating deep within my bones. The white gold light pulsed, and I felt the consciousness of the conduit fully, completely merge with my own. It wasn't just a machine, it was a vast, ancient intelligence. It was telling me its story, showing me its purpose, revealing its need. I was no longer just Frank, the tow truck driver. I was a part of its memory, its function, its hope. I was the one who had finally opened the forgotten door. And as I drove my old rig towards that blinding, glorious light, I knew that my journey was far from over. I had traversed the impossible, but the true task, the repair of a broken cosmic highway, was only just beginning.
The colossal white gold structure on the horizon grew larger with every passing moment, a silent, blazing monument to an alien civilization. My old tow truck, a familiar piece of my old life,
felt utterly out of place on this smooth, dark highway that stretched into infinity. But the conduit's consciousness, now fully integrated with my own, assured me I was exactly where I needed to be. I was not just a driver, I was the catalyst, the human element, the piece of the puzzle that could reactivate the ancient network. As I approached the structure, the immense light grew. It wasn't blinding, it was pure, encompassing. The air itself shimmered with power, yet felt serene. I finally reached its base, a vast, open expanse of polished, dark material that stretched further than the eye could see. My truck glided to a stop, its engine now silent, as if in reverence. I stepped out of the cab. The ground beneath my feet was cool and utterly still. The pure, resonant hum of the conduit vibrated through me, a feeling of absolute belonging. I was standing at the true heart of Route 66, the central nexus of a cosmic highway. The whispers in my mind were gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose. The conduit, the ancient intelligence, communicated not through words, but through direct intent, shared knowledge. It needed me to complete the connection, to mend its fractured self. My hand went to the small pouch around my neck. The black rocks, once inert, now glowed with a soft, steady blue-green light, humming gently. They weren't just keys. They were fragments of the conduit's core, pieces of its being, and they needed to be returned. I walked towards the glowing base of the colossal structure, towards an opening that shimmered with pure, concentrated energy. Just as I reached the shimmering threshold, the air behind me crackled. I turned. 2 black sedans materialized silently on the dark alien highway. Not the battered, dusty sedans from my old reality, but sleek, impossibly clean versions, their surfaces shimmering with an internal, contained energy. And from them stepped the wardens. 3 figures, not in ill-fitting suits, but in dark, form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb all light. Their faces were obscured by visors, but their presence radiated authority, power, and a grim resolve. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The conduit's shared knowledge in my mind gave them their purpose. They were here to stop me, to prevent the full reactivation of a system they deemed too dangerous, too unstable for the good of countless realities. They were the surgeons, always choosing the scalpel over the unpredictable, destructive force. I raised my hand, the glowing black rocks pulsing in my palm. My mind, now vast and expansive with the conduit's wisdom, understood their fears, their necessity. But I also understood the conduit's longing, its need to be whole. The silence between us was profound, a cosmic pause before the inevitable. Then the wardens moved, not aggressively, not with weapons drawn. They moved with a sorrowful inevitability, reaching out as if to physically stop me from completing the connection. But I was no longer just Frank. I was imbued with the conduit's will. My own hand shot forward, not in a fight, but in an act of intention. The glowing black rocks flew from my grasp, drawn by an invisible force into the shimmering maw of the central nexus. The moment they entered, the entire colossal structure erupted with blinding, pure, white gold light. The ground trembled. The purple sky above pulsed with the majestic, cosmic energy. The wardens were thrown back by the surge of energy, their armored forms skidding across the dark ground. I, however, felt no force. I felt a profound sense of completeness. The conduit's consciousness, now whole, surged through me. A joyous, triumphant song of reconnection. The loneliness I had sensed was gone, replaced by a feeling of profound, ancient peace. I looked at the wardens, now slowly rising, their visored heads turning towards me. There was no anger, no malice, only a shared understanding. The network was whole. The breach was contained, not by force, but by a restabilized system. And I had been the one to do it. My body began to shimmer, the outlines of my form blurring, turning translucent. I wasn't dissolving, I was integrating. My consciousness was no longer just my own. It was a part of the conduit, a new node in the vast cosmic Route 66. I was no longer just Frank. I was a guardian, a traveler, a part of the network itself. As my form faded, becoming one with the shimmering light of the Nexus, I saw the wardens standing silent on the dark alien highway. And then, for the first time, I felt a new voice in my mind, not the ancient conduit, but the collective consciousness of the wardens. A single, shared thought, clear and resonant. Welcome, driver. The journey truly begins now.